It's standing by, ready for me to say, welcome back to Lynn Gardner, live on stage at 101.
Oh! Hello, everybody. We've had fantastic soup here, and I hope you all at home have had equally delicious soup or something else in your own kitchens. And I hope you've had a great time networking as well. So, this afternoon we have got two panels. The first panel is about place. And what we are asking is how can arts in public space, how can those programs help in creating a sense of place and reflecting identity, and why is that important? And how might this shape the nature of the work that artists make? I have with me a really terrific panel, which includes Ruth Colbridge from the National Association of Areas of Outstanding Natural Beauty, Adriana Marques from the Peabody Trust, Sally Lampitt from Applause, a rural touring organisation, and Kully Thiarai, who, of course, from Leeds 2023, who spoke this morning. We're going to kick off with Ruth, Adriana, and Sally giving a very brief overview of the work they do. So, Ruth, first of all, please.
Minutes on areas of outstanding natural beauty, and there's 46 of us across England, Wales and Northern Ireland. And it feels really apt to be on a panel that's about place, because that is what we are. We are places. And I think coming in from the outside and looking at landscape, it's really easy to think about these places as places where you go for a hike or a view. And I think I'm probably pushing on an open door here, talking to you people about how actually we're far more than that. Our places are the product of geology and weather and landform. We do for nature, climate and for people. And his suggestion really was that while AONBs are, and parks too, close to urban areas and should be accessible, we really don't reflect the wider population of the UK as it is today. And so from that, we've had a look at what we can do more, how we can engage with these people better, everyone. And how we can engage with people on their own terms, how we can get people to access these beautiful areas on their doorstep, and really develop rooted, meaningful relationships with these areas that are designated for the public good of the nation. So from that, we've worked with Activate in Dorset and had a art and landscape strategy put together. We've had training for most of the AONBs in the country. And there's a huge will now, I think, the ambition within the AONB family to work with artists, to do more for nature, climate and people is huge. I think what we've really recognised in having this strategy developed is that art does something that we can't as a group of conservationists. That connectedness it's a feeling. It's not about policy. It's not about doing the right thing. People develop relationships with place because of experiences that they have. And we see art as one of the key ways that we can achieve this. So you can see the various pictures around the ways that we're doing this across the country. Ephemeral art, this is actually a permanent piece within the Surrey Hills that you can see now. I think I'm running out of time and I'm going to sit down. But yeah, I think that's why I'm here, because we're about place and because art, I think, adds something and helps us to define place.
Very much indeed. I think we may go on to maybe try and unpick some of those things that that Ruth raised. I was particularly interested in the idea around the fact that that art does something that we can't, and that people define their relationship to place through the experiences that they have, and what that means in relation to art and what artists do. Adriana, you're next. Let's hear from you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here today. So I'm just going to have some images of Thamesmead to play in the background. Yeah, there we go. So hopefully these will speak for themselves. So I work for Peabody, which is actually a charity. We've been around for over 160 years, and we're London's largest and oldest housing association. But we're actually often mistaken for a developer, which I think in the context of this report and these conversations are particularly pertinent. So Peabody, in addition to delivering, social housing for the capital and South East London, we are also delivering a really large-scale regeneration programme in Thamesmead, which is in South East London. There's over 45,000 people who live there today. I'm just kind of conscious images aren't rolling on. Sorry, I've got a lot of images to share. Is that working? I'm going to carry on, and then hopefully they will catch up. So we're looking at a really long-term, big, ambitious regeneration plan. So it's a 30-year plan. We're 5 years in. We're looking at building over 20,000 new homes, a new town centre. This is like really big stuff, and naturally is going to be, and has been, daunting, unsettling, challenging for the communities that live there today. But I think actually what's been really valuable and what's been really exciting, especially for me in my position, is that Peabody have really realised that culture is intrinsic to making places successful, making great places, engaging with communities, and really making people kind of like feel connected to where they live. So we've been embedding culture from the start of our regeneration plans. And over the last 5 years, I think what I've been really trying to do through our cultural programme that some of these images illustrate is starting to have that conversation, starting to kind of like open those doors. And there was this lovely phrase in the report that I really kind of cottoned onto, which is this act of like deep listening, which is amazing, but is also really hard work. So I'll come on to that a little bit in a minute. But I hope that these images kind of like start to tell the story of Thamesmead. I kind of feel like they speak for themselves. I mean, Thamesmead has got this amazing brutalist history, also very challenging. It is really identified with a lot of like landmark films like A Clockwork Orange, and however hard I try, I just can't seem to shake the connections with that film, for better or worse. But when I started the cultural programme, I actually started, contrary to what David's report says from a developer's perspective, we started with big spectacles. And the very first thing I did was put lots of really big fireworks on a lake, which was both positive and negative in equal measure, I would say. now move from kind of spectacle into community leadership. So we actually lead, or I actually host and lead 7 decision-making groups in Thamesmead, which is amazing, but you kind of have to be careful what you wish for, and now I feel we're in the space of being brave enough to then do what they actually tell you. So that's kind of a very brief snapshot of what we've done in the last 5 years, but there's still a really long way to go, and it's still 25 years left to go. And I feel that now the work that I'm doing is focusing on trickier things, actually. It's like, how do we lobby and make the case for long-term cultural spaces that are affordable and that are like truly sustainable and welcoming of everybody? How can we measure happiness, and will that actually help? Like, I would just love to develop a happiness index that, my CEO will take seriously. But, is that a good way forward? We've talked a lot about experiences today, and I actually think that that's probably the way to go next. I mean, now more than ever, we need to love where we live, right? And I really think that culture can do that. Another big mission I'm on is to fight for affordable housing for artists. Again, the report talks a lot about how do we support the creative industries in amazing maker spaces like this, but artists also need to be able to live where they work. And we've been able to do that through Bow Arts in Thamesmead. So I feel like I'm grappling with a lot of big things and really so happy to be with supportive faces in the room today. I'll just explain that this last slide is 5 young people that we've appointed to commission our first permanent public art in Thamesmead. They're all under 25. They've got 200 grand, and the decision is utterly theirs. And I'm a little bit petrified, but also really excited. So thank you very much.
Again, in relation, and as we move potentially out of a pandemic situation, about the need to love where we live and the role that artists can play in that. And for me, it also kind of raises questions around regeneration and the role of art for both good and bad in terms of that, about embedding culture, and I also about how we lead, and those might be questions that we will pick up on this afternoon. I've always been very taken with that thing that Stella Duffy from Fun Palaces always says when people say to her about the fact that she is a leader, and actually she says, I don't lead, I enable communities to be leaders, and to find their leadership role. And I think, that is a fundamentally different thing. Raised lots of questions for me. I rather imagine that both for you online and for you in the room, that it has raised questions as well. So one of the things that I would be very keen is that if you can think of those questions and hold them in your heads, and in a minute, I hope you will get the opportunity. I will endeavour, I will make sure you get the opportunity to ask them. So please, your questions would be very, very welcome. Okay, and our third speaker is Sally Lampitt from Applause.
Hello everybody. I am the programme lead and deputy director at Applause. Applause is a cultural organisation, it's a charity, it's a rural touring scheme. We're funded by Arts Council England, and we're based in Kent in the southeast. Communities are really at the heart of everything that we do. We've been working in and with local communities for more than 20 years across Kent, East and West Sussex, and we've been supporting those communities to bring accessible, engaging, inspiring cultural experiences into their lives. While our core region is Kent, East and West Sussex, we also develop projects further afield. We often work with partner organisations and other rural touring schemes. And then alongside the communities, we are also absolutely committed to supporting artists to both create and develop new work and to reach new audiences. So supporting them to tour their work through our network of volunteer hosts and programmers. So Applause works in sort of 3 different ways. We have a very traditional, what we call a village hall touring scheme, where we take a professional theatre, dance, live music, storytelling into village halls and community spaces. We're also the lead partner in a project called In Crowd, which commissions spoken word inspired shows, live literature that we take into pubs. And then we have outdoors. So we've been running an outdoors touring model for over 10 years. And for this, we actually commission small-scale outdoor pieces of work that will go into existing events such as village fetes, community days, small-scale festivals. What we've found actually over the last couple of years is that we have, working alongside those rural communities, we're also now beginning to deliver work into low socio-economic semi-urban areas, and we're also developing opportunities for larger venues to both explore and extend their reach beyond their buildings. So we usually commission about 6 new shows every year, and our commissioned artists are funded throughout the development of that work. We often co-commission work, and some recent collaborations have been with the Roundhouse in London, the Marlow Theatre Canterbury, Home Live Art, Turner Contemporary Margate, Greenwich and Docklands International Festival. And just to give you a bit of context, in 2021, 80 communities benefited from an Applause outdoor show. And that reached about an audience of about 30,000. Over the last 5 years, we've supported artists with commission funds of over 90,000 and touring fees in excess of 150,000. So although we're a rural touring scheme, I think we pack a lot of punch. I think what I want to do is really just finish off, but actually I think it's really important that we hear from those communities. So I wanted to share just some of the observations, some of the feedback that we got from our volunteer hosts and promoters about the impact of having a show in their community. So these are just some of the little statements that they've given me. So ours is a rural area of low cultural engagement. Children rarely, if ever, get this opportunity to experience theatrical performance. It showed people how the high street could surprise them. It brought colour and laughter to a place that is often described as being grey and sad. It provided a relaxed space for people to be creative and get involved in a performance with ease. It added another layer of community engagement because it encouraged people to sit together, enjoy a shared experience, and even strike up conversations that they otherwise would not have done. And finally, my favourite, bringing affordable shows to the community is nourishment to the soul. There we are.
Thank you. Nourishment to the soul, obviously something we need a great deal more of, I think, all of us. You will have noticed we have a 4th member of the panel. This is Kully Thiarai from Leeds 2023. Just in case there are people present now or online who weren't here this morning, Kully had a long time to talk. And it was absolutely brilliant. And she will be great on this panel, but she's not going to give a short presentation. And that's the reason why we haven't excluded her. Okay, so I'd like to pick up actually on that idea that Ruth presented when you said that art can do some of the things that we can't. And I think that's a really interesting concept. And I suppose what I'm interested to know is what are those things that art can do? What is the mechanism and how does it do it? And do you have some really good examples of that from the work that you have done? Ruth, would you like to start on that, as you were the person who raised it?
I think for us as small teams of conservationists, where we have certain things that we have to do, and that is around nature restoration, conservation, enhancement of landscape. It's not about, there are ways obviously that we can create an atmosphere where people will be spirited away by the magic of the beauty of the landscape, or by some microscopic thing that we can show to them. And those are amazing moments for people. But I think on a bigger scale, that connection with beauty, art is a bridge, I think, to create that we can invite people. It sounds odd to say invite, actually, because our areas are conserved for the nation's good. So people are welcome. But I think sometimes they need that additional invitation to engage. And we know that art can create those moments of awe that can create the rootedness that makes somebody want to come back and re-engage again and again and develop that relationship with the landscape on their own terms. One example I can give from, I used to work in Arnside and Silverdale AONB, which is a tiny AONB on the borders of Lancashire and Cumbria. We organised a series of visits for primary school children in the local urban areas of Lancaster and Morecambe to come into the AONB, spend the morning or afternoon with us, go for a short walk, and then work with an artist to create something that was then going on to be part of a lantern festival within Lancaster. And we got back to the bottom of the hill after we'd taken the children up for a run around creating dens and different, having ideas about what living things need and habitats and all this kind of stuff, and it was fantastic. And the head teacher asked the children when we got down to the bottom of the hill which of them had never been into the countryside before, and 75% of the children put their hands up. So these are children from Lancaster, which is not, it's not like London, it's not like Birmingham, it's not a really built-up city. But I think these kind of, the opportunities for children to access beauty and nature are more few and far between these days, I think, than they have been for a really long time. So to see the children really awed by what they were seeing, the views across the bay, seeing back to where they lived, they could pick out, some of them even, you know, almost down to the houses that they lived in. That was something I don't think we could have done without that artistic intervention, and it's something that I won't forget in a rush.
I find that really interesting, and actually I am somebody who lives in an area of outstanding national beauty in the Cairngorms in Scotland, and I feel kind of shock and awe every single day, but sometimes the landscape is so immense and so overwhelming that actually it's quite hard to kind of relate to it. And I recall going to see a piece made by Simone Kenyon called Into the Mountain, on a mountain, and the human then context of seeing all these performers on the mountain in a sense changed my relationship with it. So I think that, you know, is so true and so interesting. You're talking about it, Ruth, in a rural sense. Kully, I wondered about your experience of that within a city. And
yeah, I mean, I think one of the functions of art is to give you a sort of way of seeing things that perhaps you hadn't seen before. Mm. And in a sense, it's I think you used the word bridge. There is something of, you know, creating a sort of almost like a safety net for you to kind of travel through in order to see something perhaps in a different way. I think that sort of thinking about our places as canvas for storytelling is really important, actually. And it doesn't matter if it's I mean, the most brutal architecture can become beautiful in the hands of some gifted artist or creative. And I think it's no surprise, certainly in Leeds, you know, has been a huge plethora of murals, you know, partly driven by the commitment and the passion of the Leeds United fans, but partly as a way of telling people that they're present, you know, and I suppose there's something really interesting about where that storytelling and that sort of sense of claiming identity and placemaking all feed into each other. And I'm reminded of, you know, the drama created by the Rashford mural, or in Cardiff, the damage done to another mural. And, you know, in the battlegrounds of those culture wars or divisions, you know, actually the art says something much more powerfully, I think, about both the landscape, in whatever form it is, and our relationship to the dynamic of the conversations we're trying to have. And I think that's something to be embraced and welcomed, even when it's very, very challenging. And, you know, it goes right across to the displacement of the statue, right through to, you know, a solitary soul sitting in the middle of a lake and suddenly the magic happening around them because somebody staged something in very particular. And I think the final thing I would say was, you know, I was very taken a number of years ago when Tipping Point hosted and invited artists and scientists to come together on a residency model to look at how one could talk about the climate crisis. And, you know, because there's no doubt that the science tells you loads of things, but how you galvanise an understanding about what you do about it, actually that dynamic between artists and scientists was a really powerful way of thinking about change making and place making.
Yeah, I think particularly with climate change, I think one of the things that art can do in those circumstances is that at those times where we look at climate change and we feel completely kind of hopeless and paralysed, is that because of the fact that it uses storytelling, that it helps and engages us to find a way through that. Adriana.
I've just been thinking about kind of my day-to-day, and one of the things that I'm constantly doing is getting colleagues, you know, so I live in the housing association context. I work with designers and architects and landscape architects and groundsmen and social workers, and it's getting them to see that artists are professionals as well, which of course sitting here feels, you know, very obvious. But and going back to what you were saying about creating the canvas, it's whenever I start a new project, I guess with colleagues, it's about creating the space. So I launched an international competition for an artwork 2 years ago, which is resulting in this hot air balloon project. I hope you might have seen an image. That's just the model. The full-scale hot air balloon will fly this summer and will be 23 metres high. That was just 5 metres. Anyway, I just remember presenting to colleagues saying, oh yeah, I want to run an international art competition. They're instantly like, oh yeah, you could do this. Oh yeah, you could that. And I'm like, you're kind of missing the point. You know, it's about creating the space for artists to do that. And again, when I've been making the case for giving young people all of this money to commission public art, it's actually making the case for an artist to do that and not to give that to an architect or a designer. So I think sometimes it's just about, it's about creating a space and conveying the sense of professionalism, that this is, you know, a professional sector that cannot be replicated by others. You know, I wouldn't, you know, with all respect to my architect colleagues, you know, they could never replicate or create some of the ideas that I think we're all talking about here today.
Right. Okay, but picking up on that, and I think what you're saying is really interesting, but what I'm interested in is how do you ensure that actually it is just not the voice and the expertise of the professional artist that, in a sense, goes to the top of the agenda? How is it that you ensure that the community actually, that, you know, you talked about how it's quite challenging. Regeneration is very challenging for communities. And my question is how do you absolutely ensure that it is inclusive, that they do have power, and that you are not giving them what you and what the artists think that they need, and are giving them what they are? And I will pick up, because somebody online has, and in fact it was a question for you, is saying, I think it was in relation to when you were talking about the young people and being a bit terrified about what they might come up with, and saying, how do you get the very best from these people? How do you ask brilliant questions to get fantastic answers? And is it about asking brilliant questions to get fantastic answers, or is it about listening? I don't know. Tell me.
Yeah, it's a bit of everything. So, you know, with that programme with the young people, which is very live right now, they've literally just shortlisted 3 artists. So they have been through, you know, kind of like a training and a mentorship programme. So I think there is this very careful balance you need to strike between, you know, bringing in expertise. So they are being mentored by a number of professionals, but I guess the key thing is that they are seeking lots of different viewpoints. They're speaking to lots of different artists and creative practices. So it's about exposing them to what's out there and then letting them kind of make up their own mind as to what resonates with them, what feels like it resonates. I remember in the press release that they put out about themselves, they said we want to commission work that really matters. So that is completely for them to decide. And then it's about that support, I guess being diverse and being pluralistic and giving them exposure. So we also run or support a resident group that completely programs the annual festival. And again, it's about that support and that guidance. I guess there's no other way to really describe it other than the deep listening and then making sure that they've then got the information and the tools and the access. So if they're asking to program a certain artist that they don't have contacts to, then that's when we can kind of come in and make that bridge. But I think it is about putting those systems or processes in place whereby you listen, which in all of these cases that I work with is just a lot of regular meetings and forums and exchanges.
And the
being
fact,
quiet.
presumably, everything starts with a cup of tea. Yeah.
Or a Zoom call in these days.
I was just going to say that I think from our perspective, I think one of the crucial things is about having mutual respect, and actually it's about understanding that if you're an artist, you're going into somebody else's space, you're going into their community. This is, and I think you have to understand that. I think that's where you do have to listen. Equally, when artists go into communities, I think the best work comes when they are listening and when those communities can hear their voices in the pieces that have been created. So I think it's all about that dialogue. For me, it's about having conversations and that dialogue and what comes out of those conversations and how that's developed.
It's interesting though, isn't there? Because sometimes it almost sounds like it's oppositional, that there's a binary choice between the artist that makes the art and the community or the co-created practice. They're not
No, they're working
in
together.
competition there. And absolutely there are right places where artists will do extraordinary things because there's an impulse that drives them to have something important to say, and we have to really value that. And there's the other side of the equation where, you know, a collaborative, where mutually trust-based desire to make something new together can be hugely transformative. But I think we're really bad, and forgive me for saying this, but I think as the cultural sector, we are really bad at language. You know, we use the word community as if it's an all-encompassing thing that matters.
Yeah.
You know, that we all understand what we mean by it.
Yeah.
When often what we're talking about is geographical communities or culture-specific communities. You know, so let's be a bit more robust about what we mean, the language we use, and how that impacts on our behaviours and processes and systems and structures, because all of those things have a dynamic impact on the relationship in the making of that, whatever that artwork or cultural experience is. And that's, I think we've got some work to do on that.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. And in case people online couldn't hear, there was a little smattering of applause that went round in the room here when Kully was saying that. So that is particularly interesting. We've got some questions again that have come in from online. And one of them is about, I guess is around, well, it is about funding, and I'm always very reluctant to get into areas of funding because otherwise I think we end up kind of completely obsessed and only ever talking about the money and not talking about the art. But the question is, how can we all work better to ensure that funding is distributed more equally across the UK? I guess that is a particularly pertinent question today in view of Michael Gove and his levelling up agenda, to which we're all going to wait till 2030 to see any sign of it. So, I mean, is that something that you are all working in your respective areas? Is that something that you think about on a sort of daily or weekly basis?
Hourly basis for me, given that we're trying to raise a significant amount of money in a context of not being in a framework or a city framework or a European capital framework. So yeah, I think that's really important, but there is something around division of resource, and that's a big question, and it's been going on for a long time. And you know, certainly in Yorkshire with our Mayor Tracy Brabin, you know, that's a big conversation that's happening, because it's not just about art, it's not just about the cultural spend, it's about the infrastructure spend around. You know, there is no point us doing a brilliant show in the middle of the city if no one can get home because there are no buses. You know, we know what it's like to try and get to see a show in Hull from Manchester because you actually can't get back. So, you know, there's some practice, never mind within city boundaries. So there's a big question about levelling up, which is more than just direct spend on art. I think it's also about how we value culture and the public realm and people's relationships to their place, that gives them pride in that place, gives them access to opportunities in that place, and gives them a sense that they can have a conversation about making it better. And of course, COVID in some respects have made us more focused on our local spaces and places, and that's to be valued, but we need to make more of it now. I could go on a rant forever, so I'm not going to shut up.
I think the challenge that I find is, obviously I have a very located remit, but what I've started to, and I'm wanting to think and expand more on is how can I make more regional, national, international connections? You know, is it around co-commissioning? Is it touring? Is it again? Is it about working with people in Thamesmead and going elsewhere and having exposure exchanges? So yeah, when your funding is given for a very specific kind of like geographical impact, it then does become hard to kind of like make the arguments as to how that can then stretch. But so I guess that's something I'm just starting to tease a bit and see how that can stretch and what the possibilities are there. So I guess it's just to say that it's something that is in my thinking, but yet to be developed.
Funding is ever present in my mind. And also I think the other thing is that, you know, situations change all the time, and unfortunately sometimes your funding is very restricted to delivering a certain type of activity, and there's not that recognition that actually you might need to change the way that you're working, that you might need to be working with different partners and, you know, and that sort of thing. So I think that's some of the problems that we encounter.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's that is very interesting, and it's absolutely true. And I also absolutely take your point that it's not just about arts funding and the spend that goes on in London and the South East compared with what goes on in the rest of the country, that it is much more about infrastructure and whether actually you can get a bus from A to B in order to go shopping, you know, or indeed to experience art. But I do wonder whether those things are also connected to something around about what it is and the very narrow focus that really there has been during the last 75 years and via often, therefore, funders in terms of what it is that we think of as being art. And I think that was very much, again, what you were talking about this morning, Kully, in terms of letting culture loose or cutting culture loose, about the fact that we've had very defined ideas, and funders often have as well, about what art is. And I wonder is this the moment in which art, in public spaces made with and together and co-created with communities is the opportunity to change that?
Yes, absolutely. I think it was really. I think it is. I think that there are huge opportunities for us to be able to think about changing how we work and how we perceive what art is. And I think, I think the problem that we've had is coming back to this thing, is that you have a remit to deliver certain things, and as soon as you try and work around that or outside it, that's when you come across funding constraints, and that pushes you back into following a set routine. So I think one of the things that I've really had to work at is trying to find those artists who can sort of stretch those parameters for us. So it means we're not taking the tried and tested out all the time, but actually we're working with artists in different ways that will support those developments. So for me, in some ways, although it's a problem, it's also quite an exciting thing, because it means I get to go out and search and talk to people and find those interventions that are going to spark something different.
And are there enough of those artists? Or have we not actually, in a way, that supported those artists to have the skills in order to create those kind of projects which are needed? I don't know. I mean, I sort of feel there are those artists out there, but they possibly don't realise that there are these opportunities for them, in a way. And I know that I've been doing some work with 101, where we've been looking at professional development opportunities for artists who might be working in, say, dance and contemporary circus, to think about that rural touring, small-scale work and how to push that. So, I think from my perspective, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to, work with artists in slightly different ways. I mean, I'm taking out on tour across the summer. We're working with an artist called Rhiannon Armstrong, and she's developing a piece which is poems found from words in a bin. She's going to be reshaping that for us for outdoors, and that's a very different piece to what would be normal, regular sort of rural touring, type of work. So that's how I'm doing it, sort of thing.
I was really struck by your example. You talked about the pig with the money in Norwich, and I think going back to this question of how can you really genuinely co-create something with the community is let them know what the budget is, be completely open book. So with the residents that run the annual festival for us, like they've got that in front of them. It's that, they will decide how much how much do you spend on staging? Do you go for the expensive stage? Do you go for the smaller one? So I think that, and especially then coming from a housing context, they are very aware that that budget could be spent on new windows or, cutting the grass or any other number of public realm or, infrastructure needs. But it's so they are already then making those decisions and placing that value in the culture that they are in charge of.
Okay. Right, we've got a couple of questions here that have come in. How can arts better influence local authority planning in your areas? Is that something that engages you?
It's something I have to deal with.
Yeah.
No, that's maybe unfair. Again, so in the development that we're doing, that has to go through the planning process. I think historically, planning has been very much down to permanent interventions, public art. There was the old, I come from a public art background in curating it and commissioning, and it was very much, especially in the 90s, around, percent for art and physical things that you can put in. So, and I don't know if planning context has kind of caught up in spending money on fleeting experiences of awe and wonder. I think it's more the planning context, more so than developers, that I think is still stuck in the realm of physical, long-term interventions. For example, I don't know many Section 106s that have been spent on, fabulous spectacles as opposed to something you can point at,
Right.
on a daily basis.
Yeah.
So I guess in this context, that's where I would like to see it kind of move and develop with the times. Apologies to any planning colleagues who may be listening.
I think it's really interesting from my perspective because, of course, the decision by the City Council as a lead organisation or a lead stakeholder to say we're going to keep our money in from the European Capital of Culture bid, which was originally £12 million, and we're going to galvanise and try and continue this project by raising an additional at least 20 million. So that's my budget target. But, I think that commitment to culture was a transformative thing for the city. And actually, I would say it's become a transformative thing for the wider West Yorkshire region because, and I suppose there is a real recognition that if we've learned anything, that culture, as a consequence of what we've learned about COVID, is as important as it never was before in some respects. And so the notion that cultural experiences and cultural activity and creative activity is really important for people and for their well-being and their livelihoods and their relationships with each other are kind of vital contributors to the economic and the well-being of the citizens of a place. And what's really interesting, of course, is that, Bradford today have submitted their bid to be UK Capital of Culture in 25. Good luck to them. Kirklees are celebrating as in companion to us, being a year of music in 2023, because that's been a significant element of the work they've been doing over the number of years. Calderdale mark their 50th, which is Halifax area, mark their 50th anniversary in 2024 through a year of culture. These are all in different scales and different approaches. And Wakefield are again thinking about how they want to utilise 24. So there is something really interesting about that narrative that is shifting, which says culture is really important to all aspects of our places, and together collectively we can really reframe both the business case and footfall and strengthening communities and bringing people into areas that might support businesses. That there is that interplay, and that's that's the first time I think I've really sort of been privy to a bigger policy agenda which embraces the artistic interventions as important levers for change and placemaking.
Yeah. But there is still, as indeed I think Adriana referred to, about how in fact we both value and indeed measure that engagement. I mean, you say you're trying to do that, Adriana, but what are the mechanisms that you're using to try and do that?
Well, quite. I mean, at the moment, it's numbers. At the moment, I count how many people come to our events, I count how many events there are, I count how many local jobs we support. And I mean, that has been effective to a certain extent. We still have a programme, we still have a budget, everybody is completely, in terms of the organisation, Peabody is incredibly supportive and behind what we're doing. I guess what I want to do is just move it beyond that. I'm kind of bored of counting. I want to have a more meaningful conversation because of everything we've been talking about. And honestly, listening to both of you this morning and those experiences, it gives me goosebumps. I'm like, that's surely why we are all here. We are here because of moments of joy or wonder or thinking differently. And I can't count that. I don't want to put that in a spreadsheet. Yeah. So I guess I'm trying to, in my context, I'm trying to push that on because I just feel it's important and respectful to the sector that we're working in. There's nobody internally telling me to make a better case or, provide more impressive numbers, and I do feel like incredibly privileged in that sense. But I think in this, what we're all here for today, it's to move the conversation on and to be better at our language. And so I'm still in the context where my language is numbers, and I don't want to be in there anymore.
But then maybe it is altogether about finding different ways of evaluating.
Exactly. And
Yes.
that's where I'm kind of not quite there yet.
Right.
But
Okay.
desperate to be.
Yeah. I'm sort of interested in, I mean, Kully, you've kind of referred to it a number of times, but about that idea that I guess, you know, Liverpool is the prime example of city of culture and what actually it has done following being a city of culture. And I remember on a couple of occasions when I've spoken to Claire McColgan, and who talked so eloquently about that idea of using culture as a way to reflect back the city to its people, the people to the city, and in fact to tell the kind of evolving and changing story of that city. And I'm interested all with your own experiences in different places about how you feel that you, in the work that you have done, either where you are now or have done in the past, you've been able to do that. I mean, I think you talked about Cardiff this morning in a very eloquent way, but Ruth, do you want to
we're talking about legacy, I think, aren't we? I think, so currently we're working with Walk the Plank, Green Space, Dark Skies, and that is something that's, so throughout 2022, it's part of the Unbox Festival. We're trying to recruit 20,000 people who will create large-scale artworks using smart lights in landscapes all the way across the country. And I think for us, it's maybe awkward for some of the artists that we work with, that we are unashamed. We're not about art for art's sake. We're about art as this bridge, and about creating, and this is something that's very much within the Walk the Plank ethos for Green Space, Dark Skies, is that the idea is to create people who will be the environmental guardians of the future. So I think what we want is to, I think, create communities of people that have that rootedness, that want to return, but also have a connection that means they want to do good things into the future. And that's, again, it's so intangible. We can't measure that. We really can't measure that, and that's difficult. Yeah. So I think people feeling engaged, understanding, and going on to exhibit pro-environmental behaviours, but also long-term relationships with the land and with the other people that they've connected with. So that's something for this year, and we'll see how that goes. I hope someone else is going to measure it, because I don't know how to.
DCMS is planning to measure it.
Thanks.
Oh, there we are.
Okay. It'd be great, as we've just had that intervention, if people want to ask or make observations from the floor, but can we make sure, if you do, can you raise your hand? It's sometimes a bit hard for me up here to see, so wave it around a lot. And we need to make sure that you've got the microphone, otherwise the people online won't be able to hear you. Okay. Well, here we are. Let's go.
Liz Pugh from Walk the Plank, and thanks for that, Ruth. I'm interested in the panel thinking a bit about how are we training artists to make the sort of work that matters to all of you, and how should we be doing that well?
Could have a whole day on that question.
That's a great question. For me, for the work that I do with Applause and some of my other hats, I think it's not like cut and dried like this. I think there are some instances where I have a very specific brief and I know exactly, what I have to deliver, and therefore I work with an artist to deliver with that brief. There may be other occasions where actually I've got that freedom for me to be able to say, okay, this is a theme that I need to be looking at, and that's where I suppose it's a bit more of an expansive opportunity for an artist to be able to, create in a different way.
I think we've sort of looking at all sorts of ways in which you create knowledge and insight and learning and peer exchange. But the other thing we did last year, which is just coming to fruition, was that we did an open call for 23 artists to work in 20 different communities, whether they were neighbourhoods but really their places or their sense of who their community might be, and allow that to be a co-created practice to see what emerged. So the boundaries around that were quite loose. You could define, you needed to define yourself as an artist, but your practice could be all sorts of things, and your neighbourhood or your community could be a number of things. So that's creating some really interesting conversations. Some of it's about the community along one road that's sort of split, in different ways. Others are wanting to talk about nature in their landscape and how you tell stories through seeding particular things. And the nuances of those conversations, I think, are powerful because they're working across different art forms, but also embedded in their locale. Some of those, I think, will flourish into extraordinary things, and others might just be, I learned something there as a creative, and I'm going to do something, or I met a new network of people, and we don't know what will happen next. So we've been very light touch about it, created a framework and a structure, enabled those 23 artists to also come together and sort of catch up with each other and learn from each other. But the root of it is that sort of sense of doing something together with your community.
Yeah, Liz, what's your experience of that as an artist?
Well, I was just going to say that I think if we're talking about co-creation, we should also be talking about co-learning. Yeah. And so I was thinking about this idea of co-training and who is training who, yeah. And creating space within projects for that co-learning as a prerequisite for what success might look like. And maybe that needs to be always there as part of the journey.
I mean, isn't this part of what I would kind of generally say feels to me like a kind of shift altogether, which is, in some ways, and not maybe that long ago, one might have looked at a lot of art that took place in public spaces as being something that delivered a spectacular wow factor, yeah, and that we have seen a considerable shift in that, which is that it still delivers that wonder and that awe, but increasing number of projects that are doing that in a different way, and they are embedded, they are networked, they are hyper-local. And that there is an argument about turning around and saying that it is exactly that work which will turn out to be, one, the most sustainable, and in the longer term, most transformative, and thirdly, in an odd way, has the potential to be most relevant in a much wider context and in different places, not just relevant to one community, but maybe to many communities. I mean, is that something that you, as people who are commissioners and are thinking about? Yes?
Yes, yeah, definitely. I think for me, it's sometimes those small interventions that actually can be the most exciting because they spark opportunities, they spark dialogues and connections with people. And so, and because I tend to be, with the work that I do with Applause, looking at small scale, I'm fascinated to see how, Tim has a wonderful piece, which I haven't toured, that one there in the yellow hat, that is in some ways is a very simple concept, but it has the ability to work on so many levels. And I think that's really important for me, for the communities that we work in, to be able to find those pieces of work that can work across those levels.
It's interesting though, isn't it? Because there's a whole discussion about, have we changed co-creation to what was community arts? And just...
Oh, that's interesting.
Do you know what I mean? So it is to do with where power resides, what is the nature of that relationship, and what is the impulse that's taking you to make that decision to do that piece of work in that way. And I think, let's ask, there is a huge history of community arts practice. It's extraordinary. Great artists have come out from that place, but we tend to kind of grab onto the new and use a new frame and then sort of go, that'll give us more funding. So I think it's also partly about just being honest with what we're trying to do, why we're trying to do it, what the outcomes and impacts we're trying to achieve. I'm old enough now to kind of know that there are artists who are creative artists now, like Shanaz Gulzar or Lem Sisse, who came into that world partly because they had an impulse to be creative, but partly because they saw me or someone like me in their school or in their youth club or in their community doing something that they thought, oh, if she can do it, I can do it. So let's not forget that that is part of what we're talking about in all of this stuff, because it's just sort of, when Light Night happened in Leeds last year, one of the partnerships we had with the team was to say, it's brilliant having all the work that happens in the city centre and in these locations, but let's test some stuff that happens in Chapeltown or in Holbeck, and that dynamic is really equally transformative for some of those young people or those families to be able to say, they came to my neighbourhood and did you know, I saw these flying birds, over the side of the house and it was extraordinary, and did you see it? That's those sorts of, they might seem tiny things in comparison to the giants or, the Roald Dahls, but they are absolutely meaningful because that's about engaging in a level of respect and trust and commitment to a place. And that matters, really matters. And that's where I think we sometimes go wrong, because we just are a bit broad brushstroke, and the small details of what the welcome is like, what the ask is like, what the encounter is like, make a difference to how people feel about you.
But that's absolutely, isn't it, about the kind of barriers that we put up all the time, that thing that we say everybody is kind of welcome in the arts, but actually we're not very careful about the welcome, how we frame the invite, and also then the welcome that we actually, give in those circumstances. I mean, my view always around that is slightly that I think that the barriers, those people that will work in the arts, then actually secretly the barriers rather suit us. So we're, that's one of the reasons we're so slow to dismantle them. Yeah.
I was just going to give a really slightly, insignificant example, but going back to language, language is so important, and it's that deep listening. I was just kind of confronted with feedback about 2 years ago where we called something a community fete, and I just got shocked, why are you using the word fete? We're not in Europe, we're in Southeast London, you need to call it something else. Yeah. And I was just yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's just sometimes trying to do things quickly, getting into Thamesmead, I was just I have to do a lot and I have to do it quickly because I need to make a case, because I need to build momentum and create this confidence. And I think I'm starting to learn to slow down now and to do that listening and to allow that space for that feedback. So I don't know, it was just, I guess it goes back to language and listening and examples of respect, and really interesting what you were saying around, community arts, and is that, I guess what's interesting for me and what we're doing is that this co-creation, co-production isn't actually just sitting in the cultural programme that I do, but we're starting to do it across everything. So we have just been creating a new piece of landscape that, again, has got the community design CDC, community design group panel. But then there's a whole other piece around community governance. How do you appoint people? Do you pay them? Do you not pay them? If you're asking for, a local resident's time in their input, then the power of balance and how do you you know, it's all very well to say equal respect, but when one person's being paid and the other one isn't, is it really equal? Yeah. And then once you start paying them, they're still not going to be paid the same, so is it still going to be equal? So the inequalities just seem to kind of like go on and on and on. So it always feels difficult, but just something not to be shied away from, I think.
I think you're right about the not shying away, because another issue is, you know, you pay people something and then it affects their benefits, and it all has a knock-on effect.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the danger again of what Kully's slightly talking about, the broad, you know, brush strokes that we go, oh, we can do this and rush in and without kind of really thinking about it. Okay, we've had a question that's come in from somebody online. I'm sorry, but actually I don't get the name of who it is who has asked the question online. But it's going back, I know that, Adriana, you were talking about the difficulties about how you measure, but I think this is, and how you evaluate. But the question is, what are the new ways of measuring impact? Can anyone share their favourite, more meaningful ways with us? Now, these, I think, the reason I like this question, I don't, because I sort of take it to mean not necessarily the way that the DCMS may measure it, or the way that Nadine Dorries would decide that therefore it is good to fund, or even how the Arts Council might decide these things. What would be your own personal favourite way of measuring, you know, something that's meaningful? Again, you know, just to go back to this morning, I thought that moment when Kully said, you know, the little boy who at the end of the Royal Dow Day had kind of gone, this was the best day ever. So this is one of those questions, like the end of any questions where you've got to do it in one sentence. So let's begin with Ruth at the end.
We've experimented with a whiteboard where we let the children write what they thought, and we always get some really unexpected responses, but always positive. Is that a sentence? Is that one sentence? I can't give a specific example, but there's always good.
Photos and heartwarming anecdotes.
Yeah, it's the voices from the communities that speak to us all the time, actually. That's where we get our feedback from. It's letting people speak.
We're trying to do it in all sorts of ways, but we're working very closely with the Audience Agency and the Centre for Cultural Value to really think about how we might navigate some of these conversations, so that we do have the metrics right through to the anecdotes and the stories and the meaningful encounters. So I don't know where we'll get up. Perhaps ask me that question in a couple of years' time.
Listen, thank you to all of you, and thank you to everybody online and everybody in the room. We are now going to have a 10-minute break, just 10 minutes, and then I will be back with another panel to talk, well, I mean, it's all connected. This was place, we're going to talk people. And I look forward to seeing you all very shortly. Thank you.